2021 was actually our highest year of crime. And to see us about 4% over was one of those things that you're going to focus on. Just natural as a chief, like you want to see that decrease. You want to see like us making progress.
Seattle Police Chief Adrian Diaz right there talking about progress or the lack thereof when it comes to certain crime statistics in Seattle. An important report on crime before the Seattle City Council this week. Also, is it love in the air this Valentine's Day? Possibly. But what makes it really special is a special election for social housing in Seattle. And also, can we please stop crashing our cars into buildings? Advice I never thought I would have to give. But we're discussing these stories and so much more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. And my co-host is David Croman of the Seattle Times. David, huge achievement for you recently here. Charles Mededa of The Stranger picked up your story, which we're going to talk about later in the show, crashing into buildings. Congratulations to you. How does it feel?
Good. I just, he always finds, there's not a lot of minds like Charles Mededa's, and he always finds a very unique and fascinating way to interpret stories, and so it's fun to see how he read my story and his takeaways. Agree with some of it, some don't agree with some of it, but I love Charles Mededa.
Yeah, no, a unique mind, that is for certain in here in Seattle, and I'm glad that we're going to be able to talk about that. And David, thank you to you. Thanks to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. Check them out on the first floor of Seattle City Hall. And thanks to our patrons, too. The Seattle News, Views, and Brews sticker campaign is all about you when you support us at $5 per month. Morty just joined us last week. Thank you, Morty. A sticker headed out to you in South Seattle. And Linda, we are stuck on you this week. She sends in this photo of our sticker on what looks like her refrigerator. Linda, thank you for sending that. Some prime real estate there on the fridge. Much appreciated. And also a quick note from the Seattle Department of Transportation. We have some unsettled weather here. Had some lightning at my place in the last couple days here. Freezing temperatures too this week, so keep your sidewalks clear of ice. Maybe drive a little bit less if you can. Get those extra groceries. Keep an eye on the forecast. SDOT wants to make sure that you stay safe. Learn more at seattle.gov/winter-weather. Thanks to SDOT. Thanks to Converge Media for airing the video version of this podcast Wednesday nights at 7. All right, off we go with right here, right now. So the Seattle Police Department released its 2022 crime report back on February 6th, and this week they are breaking it down and answering some questions from the City Council's Public Safety Committee. The big headlines, you may have seen these. Overall crime is up 4% from 2021. Violent crime is at a 15-year high, and shootings and shots fired are also at an all-time high. There are some positive trends. The chief points out crime was starting to decrease in last year's fourth quarter. Hate crimes are down, and the SPD's response time is improving. There's the numbers, and then there's the public's perception of these numbers to deal with here. What were your big takeaways from this report?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, violent crime has been a concern in Seattle and everywhere, and I think sometimes it's sort of hard to talk about crime statistics because even when you see signs that certain crimes are going down, there is often the argument that, well, that's just people not reporting it, which is kind of hard to argue for or against because it's hard to prove that people are not doing something. So that stuff, I think the impressions are still that crime is too high in Seattle. But, for me, the kind of big test will be what the next couple of years look like, because I think there are a lot of reasons behind the crime spike, but it's sort of hard to ignore that it did happen start to go up right at the beginning of the pandemic. And
right.
So for me, it'll be interesting to see if, as the pandemic sort of recedes into people's rearview mirrors, fairly or not, whether that then follows with a drop in crime. I mean, we're starting to see some on the violent crime front, as you mentioned, in the last quarter, and that's positive news. It'll be interesting to see if there's correlation between number of people downtown and amount of crime. And so then of course there's also the argument around staffing with the Seattle Police Department and kind of what's happening there. Crime is just notoriously difficult to pin down on any one specific thing, which makes it kind of a Rorschach test for people to tie it to whatever they want to tie it to, and it's hard to sort of
Right.
irrefutably dispute that.
Agreed. And I just thought it was interesting to look at this, David, and pull apart where crime was happening the most and who's involved. The Chinatown ID neighborhood saw a major spike in shootings. The chief has talked about that. And many of them, he also pointed out, were linked to homeless encampments. Likewise, last month in Seattle, the chief brought this up too. 6 homicides reported, 4 connected to homelessness. I wanted to talk about this because this is a bit of a delicate issue, too, when it comes to public perception that the chief and the city have to reckon with when it comes to homelessness and violent crime, specifically homicides around some of these encampments.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is delicate because I don't think homelessness equates to crime, but
No.
these encampments, I think what tends to happen is people see them as a target in some ways. I think a lot of the activity that goes on in there with, drug dealing or violence, I think a lot of the perpetrators of that are not necessarily homeless themselves. They target these areas and see them as sort of easily, you can, kind of get away with stuff under the cover of, these are kind of hidden away places. So yes, it is delicate. I think sort of teasing apart how much of this is directly connected to homelessness and how much of this exists because people are preying on folks who are homeless. That's a tough and sensitive topic.
Right.
But if you've been in some of these larger encampments, I think back to the jungle area under the highway and stuff. I mean, there is undeniably some not great stuff that goes on in there. So how you kind of tease apart those issues while also kind of getting the people who need it the help that they need.
Right. That's the big distinction there. And I know that the chief's going to be working on that. The city's going to be working on that too. But controlling that narrative is going to be an important part of this as well. I wanted to move on to another topic here with you, David. And if you're listening to this podcast on Tuesday and you haven't voted yet, you do have a few hours left. Get that special election ballot in. Just one item on there, I-135, the social housing initiative. If it is passed Tuesday, well, here's hoping you did cast that ballot. And that's always my question on these February elections, David. Who is showing up and voting? Because I'm looking at some of the stats from King County elections here early in the week, and they say just over 19% of us in Seattle have taken the time to turn in a ballot before before Election Day. I know those numbers will change a little bit, the expectation closer to 33%. And I know we've discussed this initiative before, but does it concern you that a measure like this, which could have a significant impact on how Seattle deals with its housing crisis, are you concerned it has so few people voting on it?
Sure, yeah, concerned, but also not entirely surprised. I think a special election in February, especially one around President's Day, the holiday weekend, I don't, even 30% sounds okay to me. I just, and it's the fact that it's a single issue election. I think there's been a good amount of coverage out there, so I would imagine that people now sort of understand what it is a little bit better, but it's not, do you want to fund transit or whatever? It's a little more complicated than that. You're setting up a social housing organization, and it's gonna, it's for people 80% AMI or 30% AMI to 120% AMI, but it's not quite the Seattle Housing Authority. It's not, and it doesn't have any money kind of immediately attached to it. So the fact that it's and frankly, there's not total agreement about this even in the sort of affordable housing community.
Agreed.
I think makes it kind of a particularly kind of interesting. The fact of its timing and its sort of complexity, I think kind of invites low turnout, unfortunately.
Right. And I will say, among the housing community you mentioned, there's some questions about it for sure, but no formal opposition to this measure. The different agencies that I think had some concerns earlier are not saying anything right now, and that silence speaks volumes with this election. And I just wanted to kind of dovetail what you were saying here, David, and you have pointed this out before. Seattle is a yes-voting kind of town. We simply do not turn down a lot of measures, and the last major one I'm recalling was a Proposition 1 back in 2014 for some added bus service during the McGinn era there. But I wanted to look at this. Let's say I-135 passes. Do you have any idea yet how that could change the landscape for housing and housing providers in Seattle?
I don't. No, I have no idea, frankly, because I I think a lot of people might vote for it just to be like, hey, let's see, let's take a look at it. The concern of some affordable housing folks is that it will take away attention and resources from lower income people, that it focuses in the wrong places, which is people making 100%, 120% AMI. The proponents of it say, we need as many avenues as possible to build public housing, and it's not a zero-sum game that we can grow the pie rather than subdivide the slices. I don't know. I mean, I think there will be a lot of sort of, I could imagine maybe looking a little bit like the King County Homelessness Authority, which took it became a reality in principle, but took a really long time to actually find people to lead it and kind of, and actually get functioning. I could see maybe that happening, because even if it gets approved, they've then the next step is to figure out, all right, how do you actually build this housing? And that's kind of the million, or maybe in this case, $1 billion question. And so, I have no idea how it'll play out. It'd be interesting to watch for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Just the creation of a new public development authority is no small undertaking. And I think getting that on board and actually talking to the city council about how that part of it is supposed to be funded, because the city is supposed to provide the buildings, the staffing for that going forward here. So the council will be listening to what the voters are saying here too. They're going to have to listen to that as we see what happens with I-135 over this week with results and into next. So thank you for the discussion about that one, David. And I wanted to make sure that if you had it back at home, folks, cue up that 1986 classic from the band Europe. It is the final countdown for bills to get out of committee in the state legislature, and some interesting concessions in progress on some of Olympia's major housing bills. We're going to talk about it on Now Hear This. I know I probably should have run a clip of that song, but who wants to get sued by Europe? Not me, baby. All right, so this Friday is the first of several cutoff dates for the state legislature. If a bill doesn't make it out of committee and get read into the record in the Senate, on the Senate or House floor, it's dead. And there's an interesting twist on the way some of the housing bills on the docket, specifically when it comes to increasing density, requiring fourplexes to be allowed, etc., and getting rid of local parking requirements. A great report in Public Cola about this. As I reported on the Seattle channel with the missing middle housing bill last week, state lawmakers want to act quickly with these housing bills, but some local mayors are pushing back.
So if we want a future where young people can buy homes, start families, build equity, people have affordable rent, we do have to treat this with some urgency.
I do believe that our legislators are doing this with the best of intentions. There are just some unintended consequences that we want to make sure don't happen.
That's Representative Jessica Bateman from the 22nd District in Olympia and Mayor Nancy Backus of Auburn there. David, I thought this was interesting because Public Cola is reporting that while the state wants to reduce or eliminate parking requirements, there's some bipartisan pushback on this issue. Some state lawmakers in cities like Kent are saying this whole concept just doesn't work based on the transit system that they have there. But as Public Cola says, the compromise Olympia is considering, requiring that 4 parking places for a quadplex, for example, might push a homeowner or developer to just build a single-family home because those parking places cost money. How do you look at this parking issue and how it impacts density?
Yeah, it's the parking minimums have become, I think the problem, the toughest part for housing advocates is overcoming. These are all very real issues that make a big difference. The tough part is overcoming the sort of eye glaze syndrome, where when you talk about parking minimums, convincing people that this is actually important and something they should care about. But it has become a big part of the kind of push for more housing density, and for good reason. Because it does make a difference when you're both in the amount of space that you have to put in each kind of development, therefore reducing opportunities for an apartment. It costs a lot more, and then of course, some people just don't need a parking space. Some people are happy to ride a bike or go to transit or something like that. Of course, cities that provide parking on the streets and have to sort of enforce that, they are going to be hesitant. Not all of them maybe, but a lot of them are going to be hesitant to give up what was basically developer subsidized off-street parking, which is what they had before. And so it doesn't,
Yeah.
it doesn't surprise me that this is, I think a lot of cities across the state are opposed to a lot of these housing reforms more generally. The
Yeah.
Association of Washington Cities, is that what?
Yeah, they don't want the state. Yeah, they don't want the city to be the state to be controlling the cities. Exactly. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, they basically oppose this whole thing. So it doesn't entirely surprise me that some of the advocates pushing for this bill would kind of look to something that they could throw a bone to some of these cities, or to try and push this forward. And parking, I think, makes sense, because if it does pass, even with the parking minimums, this would be opening up a lot more development capacity than what exists right now, and making it possible to build something other than single family homes. But
Right.
I do think that for housing advocates who are looking to this proposal to kind of in one fell swoop accomplish what cities have not been able or willing to do, using the parking minimum, or the getting rid of the parking minimum. Sorry, I'm phrasing that. I think is a high priority, and losing this, I think, would be frustrating to them.
Oh, absolutely. It's turned into a bit of a wedge issue. I just keep on thinking about it this way, though, David. It's almost one of those "if you build it, they will come" type of situations, where if you build a big garage, then that turns into a magnet for cars, and that can be a magnet for congestion. But if you don't have reliable transit that's built out, it just feels like one of these kind of chicken and egg conundrums. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I think about that, a few months ago, maybe 6 months ago, when gas prices were as high as they were. I did a story about, how that kind of affects some of the poorest folks the most, because living in areas with good transit, good density, Capitol Hill, for example, is getting really expensive to do. And so therefore people are pushed out to the suburbs, to places like Lakewood, or Federal Way, or Fife, or something like that, which also tend to not have very good transit. And so it's you're right. I think chicken and egg is a good way of putting it, because if you are a person of lower income, and you don't really have the time to take a 2-hour bus ride into Seattle to go to your job or whatever, you're probably going to want to opt for a car. And so it is that kind of unfortunate thing, where to get rid of, you want to get rid of parking mandates in order to encourage more transit use, but without the transit access, it's sort of hard to get rid of the parking mandates.
Yeah. This is a tough one, and I'm really interested to see what sort of middle ground the legislature is going to come up with. We're talking about a cutoff date of February 17th on Friday. We will see where this and other issues go in the state legislature. Very busy session here, and one that we really need to keep an eye on. I wanted to bring up one, it seems like a small issue, but it's a big one to me. This issue of the Seattle City Council working on its annual watch list. This is a resolution where they talk about the major projects that could turn into major expenditures for the city. These are projects that the council deems big and important enough to need quarterly monitoring. They're always interesting to watch. I remember when the Seattle streetcar was part of this a few years ago. So we're still in the committee stage of this week. Councilmember Mosqueda has this resolution in her Finance and Housing Committee. 2 items have been added as amendments so far, and these are the ones you need to keep an eye on. An update to the Seattle Fire Department's scheduling and timekeeping program. We'll see where that story goes in the future. And also one that I was very interested in, the expansion of Green Lake Community Center in Evans Pool. And I wanted to look at this one, David, because this turned into a pretty contentious issue last year, you might recall. It was supposed to be a full rebuild after a 2015 report that said several of these buildings should be replaced. But then the price tag, guess what, was over $120 million. So now it's more of a renovation, closer to half that price. But David, I think this is one of those, again, small but important stories to me, how the city invests in park infrastructure especially, and how it does that equitably for all of its neighborhood. It's just kind of a big issue, and I feel like a project like this one is going to get a lot of extra scrutiny. What do you think?
I think that's true. I mean, especially with the city's budget being what it is.
Yeah.
This is not 2019. The budget is a little bit tighter, and so spending $120 million on a Green Lake project is probably not as much in the cards. And as you alluded to, there are a lot of parks in South Seattle that I think probably also need renovations. And Green Lake is kind of in the heart of wealthier, whiter part of Seattle. At the same time, it's also one of Seattle's most used parks, so you can see why there is plenty of good reason to make it a nice park. So yeah, I mean, this push and pull, I think we see that argument sometimes actually with like bike lanes when people are building bike lanes up in North Seattle. Why aren't there more bike lanes in South Seattle? But then, some of the bike lanes in North Seattle maybe get used more often. But then maybe it's the same chicken and egg thing we were talking about, where if you don't build it, of course, people are not going to come. So, I think this is always a tough push and pull. $120 million massive rebuild, though, I think that is more than anything just going to be a casualty of the fact that the city has a big budget hole that they're trying to fill.
Yeah, good point. And I know a lot of different critics of this pointed out that, hey, the Rainier Pool, which is a beautiful setup, and it looks like a water park in there, that was done 10 years ago. Now, granted, 10 years ago dollars, but that was $32 million, and this one's going to be 4 times the price of that. So I know there were some eyebrows raised. But one last piece on this, I wonder also how much of a campaign issue that this could be. Councilmember Dan Strauss wrote up the amendment here that the council's looking at. Green Lake is in his district, and I know he hasn't said if he's running or not yet, but this was a contentious issue for this neighborhood last year. And when you start talking about parks, there's another one of those small but big issues for voters, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
It was just one of these things where I saw so much argument over it last year. I just wonder where that goes in terms of votes. So I know I put you on the spot with that one, David, but you are not a Green Lake voter. But I know there are a number of them out there who are concerned about this.
Yeah, well, and we don't know if he's running again. Dan Strauss isn't even running again yet, which will. But yes, I mean, I think that that in some ways was the kind of concern of folks who opposed the district elections.
Right.
Because then the fear was you create this kind of, I don't know what the right kind of metaphor for it is, but
balkanization, some have said. Yeah.
That's a good word for it. Of people, rather than sort of collectively focusing on the city, you've got council members sort of fighting over each other for resources. And, if you've got a more effective council member in one district, maybe you get more resources than the other. The counter argument is maybe some of these issues get overlooked entirely when you've got 9 citywide council members. So, but yeah, I mean, I think the bring home the bacon mantra is, what we hear in Congress. Congress representatives are always trying to sneak in little earmarks for their district.
Oh yeah.
We haven't seen a ton of that, I wouldn't say, with the Seattle City Council. I don't know that it has been as bad as some of the critics feared it would. But you get situations like this, yes, where it does kind of end up pitting the North Seattle council members against maybe some of the South council members for resources.
Yeah, interesting discussion. I thank you for talking about it with me, David. All right, coming up. What's up with all the people crashing their cars into buildings so often in this town? A fascinating and dangerous phenomenon here. David's got the story on Transportation Talk. David, you had a great piece, and maybe that's not the right adjective here, but I thought it was a great piece about cars and trucks crashing into buildings in Seattle. I'll clarify. Buildings getting crashed into by cars is not a great thing. But I guess I looked at this and I was like, I'm not sure if we need more signs up that say, driving into buildings is against the law and also incredibly dangerous, but the numbers were just astonishing on this to me.
Yeah, me too. 105 last year, at least, probably more, because that's just what showed up in the Seattle Fire Department records.
Not always reported, right?
Which would put it at about twice a week. And, for the most part, these are not little bumps or scrapes. I mean, these are instances where a fire department crew showed up and responded.
Buildings get really damaged or destroyed in some cases, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or people get hurt. And, it interested me because, every time a building or a car crashes into a building, it gets a ton of media coverage, but there had never been any sort of, as far as I could find, collective count of how often this is actually happening. And then as I looked, that actually, you can make that same point for the whole country. Really, nobody is keeping track of this, save for one guy out of Colorado who just takes 15 hours a week to try and find all the media reports he can on these things. So I guess just the disconnect between how destructive it is, how much sort of attention it gets at the time, and then the relative lack of attention around the sort of collective problem. Partially maybe because there's not probably the hesitance to do that is there's not like an easy solution here.
No. And then it turns into an issue of liability and insurance companies and a bunch of few legal loopholes too, I would imagine.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because really when you're talking about cars leaving the road and crashing into buildings, what you're really talking about is the entire transportation infrastructure that we built for cars, which is really, especially around arterials, where there are these long straight roads, often wide, and they cut through densely populated areas. The result is you get people who can get going pretty fast, and then one small mistake and they're off the road and into a building. But when you're talking about kind of fixing the city's arterials to cut down on this kind of thing, this is not an easy thing.
No.
Seattle has made some progress on that, with Rainier Avenue, the road diet, and there are some approaches that can be made, but it's not, I think it's easier to try to legislate for driver behavior. You can do things like lower the speed limit or
which Seattle has done.
Right, which Seattle has done, or in the legislature you can try and ban rights on red or lower the blood alcohol limit, and all of that is about kind of the individual driver. But when you're talking about cars crashing into buildings, what you're really talking about, as I said, is the entire system, and that is much more difficult to legislate and much more controversial. And so I think maybe that's part of the reason why it hasn't gotten as much collective attention as it has. But it's a scary thing. I think it's in some ways, it is only a fraction of the total number of collisions that happen in Seattle, but the sort of emotional and mental trauma that comes with the feeling that even when you're not on the road or even on the sidewalks, a car can easily leave the road and come for you in your home. That's a scary thing that leaves a massive impression on people.
Oh no, I was downtown, my wife and daughters. I remember being downtown, and apparently a driver had a heart attack behind the wheel. This was a couple years ago, but crashed right into, was it right outside? I guess it was a while ago. It used to be the Gap downtown. And it was just like, whoa. It literally passed within feet of us on the sidewalk there. And you're right. I remember every second of that as if it were yesterday. Such a traumatizing moment right there. And again, maybe these aren't happening that often, but they sure affect you when they're right next to you. And they certainly affect the people who are getting hurt or sometimes killed in these situations. So I really appreciated that report, David. I thought you went down some great rabbit holes there in many different ways. And I'm hopeful that SDOT takes a closer look at it too. But it is time to wrap up, my friend, and 'tis the season. Pitchers and catchers report to spring training this week for the Mariners and Major League Baseball. I saw your tweet earlier about kind of romanticizing the job of that sports reporter who gets to be down there in the spring. It sure would be warm down in Arizona now, wouldn't it?
Yeah, if I could just be a spring training reporter, that would be great. Being a sports reporter sounds really hard, and like you'd spend a lot of time away from your family, but I could do a month or two down in spring training and feel pretty good about it.
We got to find a way to take the podcast on the road, man. That would be somehow, some way. And there is some day, David, when I will have a beer with you and discuss my interaction with Barry Bonds when I was a young intern for a sports department in the Bay Area. And good gracious, I really thought I was going to be the next ESPN anchor back in the day. And boy, did he change my mind on that one. Barry Bonds was not nice to me. I'll just throw that out there. And I do not have a vote for the Hall of Fame. But if I did, Barry, you ain't getting mine. Forget it. Just do better. Anyway, that was a rough time. David, thank you very much for your time as always. Thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on Apple, Spotify, wherever you like to listen. Please do find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon and show your support. Thanks for watching on Converge Media as well. We'll see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.